Hello and welcome to Minority Arts Appreciation Society podcast, where we're ticking all the boxes. Today we're gonna talk about music to walk home by, Tame Impala's Lonerism. This is an album that I feel like if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't heard this album, then why are you listening to this podcast? I feel like if you run in certain rings of people who talk passionately about music, everyone has come across this album. It's an album that was like mandatory listening, along with like Matt DeMarco's Salad Days around the ages of 16. It just felt like you couldn't get away from this album.
Oh my god, you've just unleashed so much in my brain with that comparison.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to talk about it because it feels like a decade-defining album. Whether you like it or not, this sounds like 2010s. Like this is what it felt like, and I think it's going to be a fun album to talk about because while Currents is massive and has their biggest songs, it's a very divisive album. That's the album that people say, "Oh, Tame Impala changed; they left their roots." Whereas Lonerism feels like kind of accepted as like it's good but also really popular. So so I'm really excited, like as in that's the general consensus. So I'd be really
Yeah.
interested 8 years later to do an reappraisal of it. I mean, before we get into the preamble, I was thinking about this album, like the context it came out in, and it came out in 2012. And I was looking at other 2012 albums, and here we got like the breakthrough albums of so many artists that were going to be prominent. Kendrick Lamar dropped Good Kid, Mad City. Max DeMarco dropped Two. Def Grips dropped Money Store. Frank Ocean dropped Channel Orange, and Grimes dropped like her first big album that hit big with that song on it. Oh, what's it called? With the song Oblivion on it, and like at the time these were just albums, but we didn't know that this is just what the next 8 years of music is going to be like. Like these artists would dominate the next few years. Like 2012 was such a crazy year, and Tame Impala's Lonerism is one of those albums. Like we didn't know what a cultural force they were going to be for the next 8 years. So yeah, really cool to go back to this. But yeah, before we jump into that, something unmusic related. We've all been using Letterboxd.
Yeah.
This discussion is in no way sponsored by Letterboxd, but if Letterboxd are listening and would like to give us money, we'd be perfectly happy
that'd be
with
so
that.
cool. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering, like, how's everyone finding it? Because, well, I guess from my point of view, I've had like a serial obsession with cataloging sites. I've obsessively used Rate Your Music to the point where I've reached like, let me check. I think I've reached something stupid like 1 minute.
Yeah, I think last time you told me you had something like that on there.
Yeah, I'm at like 1,200. Like I've
We can get you help, just so you know.
Yeah, dude.
I mean, I use Goodreads as well to try to motivate myself to like read a bit every day. But the Goodreads are so horrible to use. I wish there was like a better Goodreads out there. If there was a better Goodreads, I'd be reading like Charles Dickens novels all the time. If it was more satisfying to update my Goodreads. But yeah, I find Letterboxd easily my favorite of all of these sites. It's the most satisfying cataloging site I've ever used. How do you guys feel about it?
I very recently got Letterboxd. I think it was a month ago. I moved from IMDb, and let me just say, this has been such a wonderful experience moving from that god awful nightmare of a cataloging site. Oh my god, I hate that thing so much. When you would scroll through your ratings or your watch list, it would constantly stutter as it added a bar onto the film saying available to rent or watch on Amazon Prime Video, because obviously like Amazon owns IMDb, and it was horrible. It was actually horrible, and just the design and the color palette of everything is so horrible. And then you come to Letterboxd, where it is the most insanely well designed user interface I've ever used. And the colors, they're not too flashy, they're just comfortable. Yeah, I love Letterboxd. It's awesome.
Yeah, it just works a lot cleaner than the other two. Like meaning Goodreads and Rate Your Music. Like if we're talking about general cataloging, because Goodreads is absolutely terrible in every way. Like from how it works, the culture, like the whole thing of like how many books do you want to read today? I read 120 young adult novels, and like. And also the fact that like any book which is like young adult, easy to read, and fake progressive like, oh look, there's a single gay character, and it will get like 4.5 on Goodreads, and everyone will be like, "This is the peak of modern culture."
John Green is absolutely fucking riding the Goodreads wave.
Honestly, I think his whole career at this point is just off like Goodreads, like karma. Like,
It's so true though, isn't it? Like it's not even a joke.
I think we need to talk about the economy of rating websites of based off how well they will rank books
Oh
and
yeah,
like
go for it.
whatever.
Yeah.
Because like Rate Your Music is pretty good, I think. Generally, it's like very even. Like albums which are genuinely good, like, and of course it's the ones that get the broadest appeal. Like, is number one, OK Computer.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because it's such a good album, and generally you don't get these disparate things unless an album is actually really that bad.
It's odd. I feel like radio music is the most elitist in terms of like albums like Matt DeMarco and Lana Del Rey, which are really popular. Everyone generally likes them. In the like, when you go outside and talk to real people, people are like, "Oh, I love Lana Del Rey." But in radio music, it gets real intense and crazy, and everyone's like, "No, this is not drone. This is not progressive ambient like." And then Letterbox is like a little bit less elitist. Like you still, films like Stalker are still going to be huge, but a film like Godfather Part 2 is in the top 10, I think, and you kind of get like a good middle ground. And then Goodreads like the opposite. It's like it really is like going outside and talking to people about books, but on the internet, where everyone just
Yeah.
really likes the same kind of trashy YA novels.
On OK Computer, I feel like the reason I think that's the top rated is because it is a very accessible, but like a very not. I don't even want to not accessible.
It's basically a Pink Floyd album for Gen X, right?
Yeah, but it's a very surface level and well known like album that you listen to when you're getting into music. I feel like like I remember when I started listening to music properly, literally because of you, Josh, and you recommended OK Computer. Like I listened to it and I was like, this is fucking awesome. And so I think because of the time investment that getting into music can take, like I think that is the perfect like statistically and like what's the word I'm looking for, like mathematically perfect album to be the top rated on that website, because it's the perfect level of surface level in terms of like popularity and establishedness, and also being actually good to be the top rated.
It's sort of like what David Lynch is to experimental cinema. Like everybody has watched Twin Peaks or Blue Velvet or Mulholland Drive.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like and kind of like Tarantino as well. Like everyone's seen Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, and these are kind of like gateway drugs into like more artsy cinema, and they're all generally accepted as good. But like it's like you have to watch those things before you can get into it. Same with like Radiohead, you have to hear Radiohead before you can call yourself a music fan. So I know exactly what you mean. It's like everyone has to listen to this before they use written music. Yeah, that's a good point.
And there's of course that like line of like, with like to bring up Tarantino as an example, it's like you are of like, I love a lot of Tarantino movies, but there's the line where it's like if he's the only filmmaker you bring up as like a filmmaker with vision, and like Scorsese, you're a wanker. But then there's the other side of like, you do have to just acknowledge on some level they're incredibly talented.
Yeah,
you know what I
mean?
mean?
A film buff, you have to have seen every Tarantino film and then make fun of every Tarantino film.
But also like every Tarantino film.
Yeah, you have to go through the step of liking them at some point. Like, you have to have seen Fight Club at some point. And yeah, after you've got into Tarkovsky, you can go back and pretend you never liked Fight Club. But you have to have that initial step, right?
Okay, I've never seen a Tarantino film.
Whoa, dude.
Just not one.
Obviously, it's not actual rules, but it's just how the internet works.
Yeah, it's just internet culture.
Anyway, are we ready to start talking about Tame Impala?
Yeah, let's fucking blow this wide open.
All right, so Tame Impala Lonerism. Before I start, I'm gonna ask everyone, what is your history with Tame Impala?
Smash it, Fenn.
Okay, so obviously Newcastle gets like indie music like quite a few years later than everyone else. Like, everyone here is still like, whoa, have you heard of King Cruel? Like, that's what it's like here. When would it be? Like 2016? when loads of indie kids came to work with me, and then they were like, "Have you heard of Tame Impala?" And pretty much it'd just be people playing "Feels Like We Only Go Backwards" on repeat and being like, "Whoa, guys, this is trippy. Is this acid?" And like,
Sorry.
yeah, I don't like Tame Impala.
Elaborate.
I feel like it just became the example of like very like polished music that has not much heart, which you hear a lot, and you're like, I'm okay with this playing in Urban Outfitters, but if you hear it somewhere else other than Urban Outfitters or a bad party, you'd be like, I don't want to hear this. Like, can I listen to some good psychedelic or good Beatles rip-offs? Like, give me some Elliott Smith. Yeah.
Dude, that Urban Outfitters line was fucking amazing.
Yeah. Well, wow, that was pretty scathing history. Matty, what's your history of Tame Impala?
The first Tame Impala album I ever heard was Currents, actually. God, that album feels like yesterday. Like, that is the fucking, like, sound of not my teenage years, but the teenage years of the 2010s.
It was like Arctic Monkeys was replaced with Tame Impala. Right?
Yes,
In our
exactly.
friendship groups.
The less I know, the better will forever like be stuck in my head if I think about like a fucking house party from 2015 to 2019.
Baseline is drilled into my mind.
Yeah. Like, yeah, that album is monolithic. In reality, I think it is fine. And actually, like, it's I agree with Fenn. I think that I have issues. I don't. This isn't the Currents review. I just have issues with that album. And its overall sound and the sterility of it. So that's my and then after hearing that album and it just kind of being omnipresent, and then hearing about Lonerism and like its fucking significance, I listened to that as well a few years ago, and here we are today. Josh, what about you?
Yeah, so kind of like how we were talking about kind of entry level media. When I was like 14, getting really into music, Tame Impala was definitely one of those bands. So this is before Currents has come out, so they're not really viewed as like this huge pop act yet. But Lonerism is like one of the most recommended albums on the internet. Like, you go on the internet, everyone's like, what's a good album to listen to? Oh, Lonerism is really good. So I heard Lonerism at that age, and I think I liked it. I didn't have any strong feelings towards it. I thought it was cool. It was kind of fine. But yeah, I really loved "Feels Like We Only Go Backwards" back then, because it's like it was so fresh, and I hadn't really heard. I hadn't heard Beatles yet, honestly, and it was like my intro to psychedelic music, kind of, and one of them, and so it was a really fun, exciting song, and it hadn't been overplayed yet, so I wasn't sick of it. And then I think Currents came out, and I heard that when it came out. And yeah, I remember being quite disappointed in that album. It felt overly long, and it kind of felt like they'd really gone down a poppy direction. And looking back, Yes, I'm Changing is a really great song, though. And in a weird way, like Matty was saying, the sound really encapsulates part of your teenage years. I had a close friend who had a very emotional experience with while listening to Yes, I'm Changing. So in my head, I have this weird like montage Tame Impala teenage memory of like coming of age stories, right? So yeah, they're very entrenched in kind of my maturing as a person, being a teenager. Like this, King Cruel, Matt DeMarco, like that was really the soundtrack of that time for me. And yeah, so returning to Lonerism, I think I would just off the bat come out with what I think. When I picked Lonerism, it was because a year ago during sixth form, I went back to revisit Lonerism, and I really fucking hated it. It sounded really sugary and thin and horrible. And I was like, whoa, I don't like Lonerism anymore. That means I've like progressed as a music fan. Like I'm super cool now. I can make fun of Tame Impala. So I was gonna like put him on a podcast, and I had this grand plan to come onto the podcast and just like talk shit about Tame Impala and be this cool guy. and then fucking hell, Be Above It started, and it just hit me that I really like this still, and I haven't grown at all in the past 6 years. And I adore the chanting, and when those guitars and synths come in, they just come crashing in, and I'm like, "Fuck, am I going to enjoy this album?" And does that mean I have to go into a podcast and admit that I really like Tame Impala still? So that's where I'm at. I'm sort
Okay.
of
That
ashamed,
sounds
but
pretty embarrassing.
I'm sort of ashamed, but I really loved this album.
Before me and Fen say anything, I have to say this. Josh, you might have another 1975 situation on your hands.
Yeah. Why is it that I always likes the thing that everyone hates? Like, what? Why am I like this?
I have to say there is something about your like slight shame, but also not shame and confidence in your like that I find incredibly funny.
Well, anyway, why don't you guys like this album?
Okay, how Beatlesy do you feel this album is?
I think Be Above It, when he started singing, it really did feel like but after I listened to it a few times, I didn't mind so much, and I really liked it.
As I'll rant later, my first feeling was when I listened to this. Be Above It came on, and I just wanted it to stop immediately after a minute. I was like, "No, you're not John Lennon. Stop singing nasally. Why are those horrible tones there?"
Okay. I'm gonna lay out a thesis right now. Okay. My problems with this album, I'm Beatles were my most played band of the decade. Okay. And so this album does not offend me as a Beatles fan. What my problem with this album, and I don't want to set Josh up for another 1975 that much. I don't feel that strongly about this album. But my thing with this album is that up until now, I had when albums bored me, I but I could appreciate like the sound and the talent enough. I would just give it like a middle of the road, like 5 out of 10. You know, like it's not bad, but it's just I'm just bored by it and the sound. However, this is the album where I went, no, I am too lulled into boredom by this album to tolerate that, and it is too much of a detriment to it to be tolerable. When I listen to this album, I get lost, and I mean, like, I cannot tell how long it's been. It feels like it's been forever. It isn't that long. Oh my god. There are obviously standouts, like when Feels Like We Only Go Backwards comes on. I don't really like that song, but when that song comes on, it is recognizable, and probably not just because it was, such a big deal for so long.
In Urban Outfitters.
Exactly. But yeah, this is an album for me where it makes me appreciate instrumentation so much, and even songwriting as well, because neither of these are mixed up enough on this album to make it nearly tolerable. And that's why I have huge problems with this now. I actually used to enjoy this like a decent amount. I liked it more than Currents after I heard it. Now I appreciate Currents for the fact that it at least changes up a bit.
All right, well, I've reached a point with this album where I like it so much that I can't remember what it was like to not like it. And hearing you guys talk about it, I don't get it. I just think it's obviously good, and the only shame I feel is because they're called Tame Impala and they are Tame Impala. But when I actually listen to the album, I legit just don't understand why someone wouldn't enjoy this. I okay, I think this is a concept album, and I think what it does is a really strong character study of our protagonist, who I believe is a caricature version of Kevin.
No, not this argument again.
I think it's fascinating. I think that this is like some weird, sad, soft boy character, right? And I think he's intentionally self-aggrandizing in a way that's comedic, and really unique. There's examples of this are in Why Won't They Talk? Why Won't They Talk to Me? The character of this album is, you know, kind of having these circular thoughts, wondering like, why won't people talk to me? Why don't people like me? And then he slips into this ego of like, well, if they talk to me, I wouldn't care what they said anyway. And one day I'm going to be a star and they'll be sorry. And that I'll be a star, they'll be sorry line is so, it feels too funny to not be satire. It has to be making fun of himself for kind of this ego thing. And it comes back in the track Elephant, which I love. It harkens back to the 2000s indie rock successes of like the Black Keys or White Stripes, of that kind of like mainstream garage rock driving scuzzy bass. And it's a song that has real swagger to it. And yeah, it paints this picture of this guy's ego idea of himself as a rock star and like strutting. It's silly, it's dumb. And I really do think this is a deconstruction of someone who is extremely introverted and introspective and kind of going through this constant existential crisis, but is also like not a good person, like really egotistical and a soft boy, quite frankly. There are multiple points on this album where he talks about this girl that he's in love with, and 2 times on the album he talks about how she thinks he's like deceiving her, and he just wants her to believe that she loves him. And it's clear that he's obviously like emotionally abusive, but completely unaware of it. And by the end, when she just stops talking to him, he kind of finally maybe has a bit of clarity, and it's left kind of uncertain if this character is going to grow or change. And I think that is such like it reminds me of like The Weeknd almost, of like making yourself a character in your own album and just like criticizing yourself like, damn, I guess I am a shit person. And it's really unique, in my opinion, for a psych rock album to do a really concentrated character study. I think it's wonderful. I love it. Yeah.
I feel like you're giving the album too much credit for maybe 2 reasons. First of all, is that I don't think I think the culture in 2012 wasn't around these kind of characters. I don't think that I don't think there was that same sense of irony around men like this enough for a band that would go on to be so mainstream and so pop appeal to be dealing with that kind of thing. And to go on to my second point, I think Currents is way too vapid and way too like surface level introspective for this album to, it retroactively makes this album more stupid, is what I'm saying. That album is so fucking, oh my god, like interludes like Gossip, which are with these like distorted vocals where you can just make out what they're saying, like enough to hear that it's just bullshit. Same with like New Person, Same Old Mistakes. That, I don't think that album and this album are a deconstruction of that like person. I think this is just a misadventure in being a concept album on loneliness.
I guess it's important to talk about like the tones of the album, because it's got the whole wall of sound thing constant, and like folks kind of psychedelia. But quite a lot of the time, I feel like some of the textures can just be a bit bland. Like, I'm gonna rant later, but be above it. Yeah. And some songs do the textures a lot better. Like, Feels Like We Only Go Backwards is really good at wall of sounds and choosing what sounds to use. And same with Elephant.
So
Yeah.
okay, I'm really confused. Is Apocalypse Dreams not fun to listen to for you people? Is that
I
just like not a good time? Because that is one of my favorite songs at the moment.
So it just gets lost. It doesn't break through. I think Fenn is put it perfectly with Wall of Sound. When you have an album that is all wall of sound, it gets old so quickly.
I disagree to an extent. Like, My Bloody Valentine. I think it's about how well used the wall of sound. Like, there's no sharpness or sweetness to it. Lots of the sound is just a wash over the whole thing instead of any sharpness.
I think My Bloody Valentine though they mix up the instrumentation enough
Mm.
and also the songwriting as well. Like something like what's fucking completely
I think
blanking on
sometimes it's got
to
really
hit
sweet, like,
My Bloody Valentine aside, I think what this album does so much worse than that in the Wall of Sound department is like yeah, just mixing it up, and that's why when I'll agree with you, Josh, when Elephant comes in, it is amazing. Like I was so happy, and I think that exposes the album's flaw the most to me is that just as soon as I think there's talent here, there is sonic talent here, um, like but just as soon as they broke up their pattern, I actually was amazing, and I think they could have used that to their advantage. They could have like played around with your expectations. I just think when you listen to this, there might be good songs on it individually, but when you listen to this, you just get exhausted.
I really love how the album uses its brand of psych rock, and I think that lots of the times the songs feel like they're just circling around each other and getting more chaotic, but always revolving around the same looped idea. And it kind of, at least in my reading of the album, it simulates the feeling of introspecting and being completely trapped in indecision and just having circular thoughts. And lots of this album just comes up as someone kind of wrapped in their own ego, and who is, I think, generally meant to be a sympathetic character in terms of like this existential crises they go through, but they are just incapable of making decision, incapable of considering other people. And I think it shows in the instrumentals where they just go round and around and around, and it's swirling. Everything in this album is really swirling, and I felt quite purposeful, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. So the precise wall of sound you guys refer to that you dislike, for me, really enhanced the experience of this album and made it feel very much like, yeah, walking home on your own, looking at other people, constantly worrying about what they think about you, and having this weird sort of ego of like not wanting to care at all, wanting to be this cool rock star introvert, but you're just stuck in this spiral of thought. Like I really love how the instrumentals and songwriting complement the, in my opinion, concept of the album. Anyway, so Fen, what were your three favorite tracks, least favorite track, and overall would you recommend it?
okay. My favorite definitely has to be Elephant. Like, I feel like it's probably the one where you can go, this is just the best song on the album, like, by such a massive amount. Like, it's got a really. What's nice with the textures is you've got the really low, the bum 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 bum, bit is like really muddy and different mixed and kind of cuts through when you've had so much kind of just washes of sound, and this is just kind of to the point. So it feels like a breath of fresh air. Like, it's completely different melody as well. Like, no, harmonically, it's using like blue notes, so it's a bit more edgy and harmonically instead of just old like I'm just going to use jazz chords. And what else did I like? I really quite liked Mind Mischief a bit. For I felt like again the opening has quite a nice like distorted guitar, which kind of cut through what would be a kind of bland washer sound, and there's a nice interplay between like the drums and the guitar. And the other favorite song that I put was that I really liked Keep On Lying. It
Mm.
felt like out the songs which was trying to be a bit more Beatlesy, that it worked.
Hmm.
Like the kind of, is it a synth? Yeah, the synth line reminded me underneath a bit of Penny Lane by the Beatles, and they've got a nice squidgy tone to them, and it's when the textures work quite well.
Also, in my defense against Matty from earlier on, I don't think that me painting this album as a concept album about a very flawed male protagonist is far reaching. In a song like Keep On Lying, it's literally about this guy who's so trapped in indecisiveness that he can't bring himself to tell the girl he's with that he doesn't actually have strong feelings for her. So he quote unquote keeps on lying. I think it's hard to say that Parker really wants us to have like a positive, sexy look at on this character, and I think it is making a flawed portrait. Anyway, whatever. Fenn, you can go on if you.
Okay, my least favorite song is definitely "Be Above It." I not even because it's the worst song. I really, really hated "Music to Walk Home By" as well, and I just heard this, and it was as I said before. You're not John Lennon. Stop. Like, there's this really horrible synth which he's got some flanger and an LFO on, so it just goes brum 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 brum, and moves about quickly over some annoyingly repeated, terribly mixed drums, and no real melody. It just meanders nowhere. It doesn't sound interesting. Yeah, I hate it.
Would you recommend it?
Uh, I I wouldn't. I know lots of people really like it, but I hate it.
Strong words. Strong words.
All right, Matty, how about you?
Same as Fenn, I really like Elephant. I talked about my reasons mainly before, but also like outside of the context of the album, it's just a really well put together song with a really like it comes out of nowhere and just sort of takes you on this soothing fun ride. And I do actually like Be Above It. I think it's a fun opener. And I quite like the chanting. I think it's kind of fun actually. And then when those like warm synth chords come in, I think it's yeah, I think it's a good time. Finally, my mischief isn't bad. My mischief isn't bad at all. But it I think if I'm going to say something nice about this album, it's that these songs in isolation aren't bad by too much. It depends on the song you're talking about. Some of them I do think are just going for too long, and like don't do enough interesting things sonically for me, to be worth the time. But yeah, least favorite song is gonna be the last song. I just it just bored me. Really, it just felt meandering, and I just didn't really get anything out of it. And at that point, I just wanted the album to be over. Yeah, uh, I wouldn't recommend this album. I, I, I can see like this album makes perfect sense for why it got to the heights that it did and why so many people like it. But just for me, it employs a lot of things that I like really don't enjoy in music, which again is really repetitive soundscapes and songwriting styles. Um, I don't feel like it covers enough thematically for me that I find interesting, or worthwhile. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend it.
Awesome. I'll go through my favorite tracks. First up, "Be Above It." I really adore this track. I think it's a kind of really infectious, driving intro. It has intrigue as well as just kind of grandeur to it. The drum-driven "Gotta be above it, gotta be above it, gotta be above it" is so infectious and memorable, and the ways the synths kind of clatter into the song, it's just wonderful, ceremonious.
Mm.
Thematically, I think it's a really interesting angle to open the album from. You know, dealing with themes of alienation, loneliness, misanthropy. This track about this guy trying to have like a positive mindset, looking out at the world, and that mindset completely falling apart throughout the album is sad and ironic. It's quite funny to me. Next up, I adore Apocalypse Dreams. Uh, I think this is probably one of my favorite psych pop songs of the 2010s. I love the marching pianos that come in as the track is building up, and I love the thematic cohesion and introspection of the lyrics here as we concentrate on his existential dread. And yeah, some of the "Does It Even Matter" lyrics are a bit, yeah, Urban Outfitters' existential dread. But I can go with it, and I think it's a fairly euphoric song. And the way it's delivered, the way the drums and the whole instrumentation just picks up as he screams, "Does it even matter?" And the song just like clatters on. It's so much momentum. I find it so exciting to listen to. And then the outro is tired and lethargic. It's just a very well-rounded track for me. Next up, I really loved Why Won't They Talk to Me. I love the build up with the fast-paced drums at the beginning of the track, and it's sort of great, bitter, introvert, egotistical anthem, in my opinion. Um, I love the self-aggrandizing lyrics, like I mentioned before, about, if they were to talk to me, I wouldn't listen to them anyway. And I've kind of already said basically why I like the song in the rest of this review. But yeah, I really enjoyed that song. I agree with Matty. My least favorite track is definitely Sun's Coming Up. It's kind of a really stark, stripped back piano track, which is meant to contrast the rest of the album, but it's just really boring. And Kevin's vocals sound really different here. I guess it's meant to tell us that the character's clarity of some sort, with it just being a more subdued track, and ending with kind of the foot walking on the ground. It feels like the character's finally moving on from this obsession with this woman, which was completely self-centered, and letting her move on. And there's a sense of maybe optimism that this person could grow as a person. But while I think conceptually this track does a lot of stuff for the album, I think it's a really boring song, and I don't think I'd ever really go back to listen to it unless I was listening to the whole album. So yeah, overall, I'd give this a really strong recommend. I think this album is incredible. I think it's a wonderfully crafted pop album as well as an excellently crafted psych album. And I think that Kevin Parker's introspection on this album is really funny and enjoyable to listen to and pick apart, really. I think lyrically, I appreciate that it moves away from the generic, dull lyrical motifs of, say, kind of like what we looked at in the Dan Deacon album a couple episodes ago. This one really gets to something specific and personal, and it's, for me at least, it was really satisfying to like unpick the psychology of this album. I found it really rewarding. So yeah, I think this is a great album. I'd give it a strong recommend. Again, you've probably already heard it and have an opinion of it, but hopefully I've given you the opportunity to maybe think of it in a new light. And yeah, I had a really good time with this. I'm sorry you guys hated it so much.
It is okay.
I mean, it was my idea.
It was.
Oh, was it, Fenn? That's fascinating. So when Fenn recommended it, what stage of enjoyment were you at with this album, Josh?
I really didn't like Tame Impala. I was like, oh god, I don't want to listen to Lonerism.
You were done with
again.
it.
We did it as like a joke,
really,
let's dunk on Tame Impala
Yeah.
both hate.
That's.
It was.
I feel like.
Is this a
your-
dialectic?
I feel like your experience with this album is like is the perfect account though of like becoming, not that we're immature for not liking this album, but I feel like your experience with this album is like the perfect story of like becoming a mature music listener, of like listening to something, just enjoying it sort of like on some level, and then like going into like extremes of like negative opinion and like kind of counterculture, but then just like later on when you've like grown a bit more, just finally like accepting your opinion and like something popular. And then like, yeah, I feel like that's when you first said that, it really like just made me think of that kind of journey that you go on from like, yeah, I just think that's cool.
Yeah, I'm happy that my character isn't being judged too harshly for enjoying this album. And
No, there is no.
yeah, no, it was like a reassuring moment of music is never done with you. Like,
Yeah.
you never know when you're going to return to an album and suddenly have a different reaction to it. The album changes as you change, and that's really exciting for me. Anyway, I think we've ticked all the boxes.
All the boxes are
so-
ticked.
Thanks, Fenn, for joining us for a couple of episodes. It was great hearing your side of the story, as it was. And,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, really great having you. Wish you all your best of your personal endeavors in the outside podcast world.
Good luck outside of our society, in the real society.
One day, I just want to hate an album that you like, Matty. Just for once. Why am I always...
It's because I am the queen of music. Not
Anyway.
really.
So yeah,
All right.
thanks for listening. Be sure to follow us on Instagram to get updates on new episodes and new series that we put up. What's the name of our Instagram handle again?
It's Minority Arts Podcast with an underscore between each word.
Awesome, and that will all be in the description anyway. And yeah, make sure to subscribe to our Spotify and any other kind of streaming services you happen to listen on. Do people still use iTunes? If you use iTunes, like leave a review.
5
3 stars,
stars.
three
Fuck you.
stars. I want people to be fair. I'm joking. 5-star reviews, please. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Thanks very much.